This is Tuesdays with Artificial Intelligence, with your host, Peter Ward.
Welcome to Tuesdays with Artificial Intelligence. I'm the host, Peter Ward. Got a great fellow MVP, Mona Gadiri. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's good to be here, Peter.
All right. Okay, so you were at Ignite last week, which is probably why you ignored all our emails, and you're probably speaking, I suspect. Okay. What was the hot subject? What was, obviously, everyone who goes at Ignite, they say it was an amazing. What were the hot topics that people were speaking about, and what were the interest points?
Agent IQ, work IQ, huge, big announcements around AI agents, and obviously their permutations here in the next wave of technology. I was super excited to see that Security Copilot is actually now included with the E5 license suite. So we've lowered the barrier to entry for folks to use AI with their security investigations and brought them directly into the portals where folks are doing their work. So that was definitely my big highlight from Ignite.
So work IQ, I've seen a lot of buzzwords on that. So just for the benefit of some of the viewers, what is work IQ?
I should be asking you that question. You're the
expert. Well, you can actually. All right, I will ask you that question. Okay. Basically, it's basically how to work. Your agent is now a bit more intelligent, from what I'm understanding, and how you can use that as your co-worker and to collaborate more. That's really where it's going on that.
Absolutely. More context, right, means better agent experience, better grounding in your own data, with the overall goal of, reducing the barrier of what it means to work with someone else or something else.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, that's the context as well, where the where the hallucinations get minimized as well. Like, what I'm asking is that really actually what I'm wanting as well. Mm-hmm. So basically, the agents are getting more intelligent and they're learning more about the person who's interacting with you or with the person.
Absolutely.
But so what were you? Okay, so that was that. What, and you were talking about what? What was your topic?
I'm talking about securing AI platforms and the ways that people are doing these things. There was a pretty big breach about 2 weeks ago, actually, that hit a Power Platform library called Sesame Op. And what happened was it actually was used, that library was manipulated. And then once it got put into an agent, it was then able to be part of a command and control what do they call it? Exfiltration of data using an OpenAI assistant API. Right. So it's really kind of talking about this software supply chain problem as it relates to AI, and recognizing that it's infinitesimally worse from a breach perspective, and it requires a little bit of a different approach than maybe your standard DevOps practices might give you.
Because we, like at Soho Dragon, we have a lot of conversations with Copilot, and so of course, the person who slows down any deployment initiative in an organization is the chief risk officer and the CTO. Okay, who's sort of like on the. So obviously, securing AI, particularly when you're a regulated industry, that's where it gets a bit more challenging and a bit more complicated. Okay, so I'm assuming Capgemini and yourself, you've got some beautiful methodologies to sort of like reassure the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. What I've found, even, my focus has been getting AI agents in the SOC, right? But what I've found is that pretty much every organization out there struggles with this idea of an enterprise, AI risk plan, right? Maybe they have a chief AI officer or a risk officer, and then they still have the CISO. And there's this kind of weird standoff happening around, whose responsibility is it to do what things, right? And I like to use the example of a third-party risk service is a great example of this, right? Third-party risk, right? Your whole concept is that you're trying to understand from the vendors, what they're going to do. And it's weird because the procurement people are involved, and the technical people have to be involved, and the business people have to be involved. And it's the same considerations, honestly, when you're adopting AI or trying to adopt AI. And so what I've done is I've taken this kind of way of thinking about third-party risk and adapted it for AI risk, and built heat maps and different assets that help CISOs become the hero, right? And be able to give security blueprints to folks like chief risk officers and say, this is what I expect for every AI agent that comes out the door or that comes off the software manufacturing line. it needs to still have these logging components. Those logging components need to be analyzed against big frameworks like NIST, RMF, or the EU AI Act, right? And that dissemination and simplification of the message and giving them those assets, to your point, has unlocked a lot of opportunities for AI across the enterprise, but also AI for the SOC operations folks like me who are out here, trying to dig ourselves out of all of these alerts. So yeah,
this sounds
it's been a great opportunity.
right. This sounds very consultancy speak when you've got like heat maps, graphs, sort of like fancy graphs. People love all that stuff on the.
That's only the first part of it, Peter. Though that's the how we can demonstrate that.
I'm glad it's
we can
only
get on the
first
roller
part,
coaster.
It's not the end of the engagement.
No, we haven't even built the roller coaster yet. This is just, I'm tall enough to get on. I'm tall enough to ride by myself. I can put but we still have to have, beyond the gating process, people to build the agents, people to do the AI operations, right? But also do the security monitoring of all those environments, right? And so, if you're going to do an M365 Copilot deployment, right, there are a ton of lovely security features, right, built in at the product level, at the platform level, that both need to be integrated. So, you take identity as a great example. There's a tool level or a product level, and then there's a platform level answer, right? And if you think about that for AI, right, it's the same kind of parallel there too. So we want to help you build it. We want to help you get the framework. We want to help you run it. We want to sell you services where we use AI in our managed services offers. And wherever you are along that spectrum, we'll meet you where you are.
What would you say are the blockers, and what would you also recommend people to get over the blockers in security?
Yeah, I think the biggest blocker isn't actually getting the MVP. It's getting out of that honeymoon phase, from being, we got the first agent, let's celebrate, right, to getting, the third or fourth or fifth one. I see almost like there's the blockers of the people who will never do this, right? 2-point regulated industries, maybe some slower moving folks, but it's almost like there's a new divide happening between the folks who said yes and the folks who are ready to say yes and, right? And I'm really interested in figuring out what the blockers are between the MVP stage and rolling this out, into a production environment, having Copilot for more than, the first 20 users, right? Rolling it out to everyone, or deciding who should get it, right? Almost seem like those are the bigger blockers now than, I don't have the money for, security or for Copilot, M365 Copilot, or I don't have the time to learn about this new thing.
Yeah, I would almost say the bigger blockers here is that when you're doing an MVP, it's below the radar, okay?
Yep.
And senior management doesn't really care because it's MVP or whatever. But the moment it goes above the radar and the prize, suddenly there's risk. Okay, senior management don't take risks; they'll always choose the safe routes. Okay,
yep, 100%. They will choose a thing that doesn't get them fired.
They will choose them, or they'll choose the most logical, safest route, particularly in big companies. And that's how big companies it's usually on a personal level, where someone who's a bit of who likes to go a little row, push the envelope.
A maverick. Yep.
Yeah, a little bit of a maverick, and they generally don't get attracted to big companies which are highly regulated. They're perhaps more in creative industries or smaller companies or startups. Okay, so therefore you're dealing with a personality factor there, which I always, which is always like that comfort factor of like people always do the safest, most logical thing. And also, if you're in an organization where you can't perhaps speak to the person above and make a decision to sort of like say, you know what, I think we should do this, but there's a few bit of risk here. I'm unknown. That's very rare. You need to have an environment where management can speak to their line manager and just say, look, there is a bit of risk here, but I think it's controlled. Why don't we just throw the dice a bit on this? If it doesn't work out, it doesn't cost us any money. Because the moment that also has to go to the CFO, that's where there's going to be problems in approvals and justifications.
Right. Then you're like, are you under daddy's credit card limit, or do you have to go, yes, dad, for real money? But yeah, no, I think that you said something really profound there, Peter. Like the issue that I think a lot of folks are having, right, is that how do I fly now above the radar in a way that doesn't make me feel like I'm in an AI desert and the only one out there who wants something to be different. And I think that's the challenge at a lot of different organizations. And I think the other overwhelming, factor part of this AI transformation is it's kind of hitting us all at once. It's not like it's just the salespeople asking for it, or just finance asking for it, or just engineering asking for it, right? Maybe it started as just something engineering was asking for, but now the salespeople know how to use it, and now the finance people want it. So it's also, I think, this idea that there are more and more interested parties than maybe there were 6 months ago or even a year ago. And that means that more and more, there's more, what do they call it? The tragedy of the commons, where a lot of people are trying to use the same thing. And you've seen this in some of those monolithic AI things that have been brought out at some of the big companies. I know a lot of popular law firms and different even consulting firms have put out like their own internal AI that's meant to, help people do their thing. And it isn't, it's more of a standalone thing. But I think people are realizing that it's really expensive to keep some of those standalone things where you're building a lot of these things on your own, instead of using more things that come out of the box or that are pre-baked, like M365 Copilot is.
Well, the other thing as well, it's like when you've got usually big bang initiatives don't generally work. You mentioned something when you've got sales and marketing, when you've got the different groups asking for it, you then suddenly have a community behind the initiative, rather it's seen as IT driving forward. It's interesting about the decision making. Like you know what, like the big, you've heard this before, like the most stupid bad decision making in the world, for business standpoint, was. Do you know the whole case study for this?
Tell me about it.
Okay, so basically, there was a record label in the 1960s called Decca Records, and they turned down the Beatles. You heard this story?
Okay.
Right. The guy there, it was a guy called Mike Smith, who worked for Decca Records, and his manager told him, 2 bands are coming in. You need to choose only one, and you can just only choose one. Okay, so this band comes in called the Tremolos, and they've actually had 2 number-1 hits. They were actually pretty big, and they actually performed better. And they were based in London, so they were closer to the record studio. Okay, so therefore it was easier to get them to record the album. The Beatles had couldn't sing as well, and they had no album out, and they were based in Liverpool. The most logical thing for the guy to do would be the most rational thing, which is they've got 2 number-1 hits and they're closer to the record.
Yeah, pick the safe bet.
Why would I choose that? Okay, instead of the guy saying, you know what, I think we could probably, let me speak to my manager. I know you've told me this. I know you've told me this, but I want to take a bit of a wild card. Can we choose 2? Okay, and they said no. Okay, and of course the rest is history. Okay, wow. But that's sort of like thing where quite often it's not necessarily a technology which will drive things across an enterprise. It's actually the personalities and the culture as well.
And the momentum, right? Like if you have all these other things lined up, it feels like it's an easier choice, even if it may not result in the biggest bang for your buck. I think that's a very salient point as well, Peter.
So let's go back to the whole enterprise factor. Okay, so you've done the MVP thing. What are the security mistakes people make to make like an agent or an AI initiative go enterprise?
I think there's one is that when I worked in the government for a little while, we called it a target of evaluation, right? What's in scope for the actual security posture? I think the biggest mistake I see folks make is not having the right target of evaluation of what needs to be secured, right? People will say, oh, it's the model data, the training data. That's the most important thing. Please secure the data. If we don't secure the data, then we're hosed. But at the same time as we're saying, oh, we need to secure the data, we have other folks who are saying, well, no, we need to secure the application. It's the application that matters, right? The application, how it's designed, it's, how it's during runtime, right, is where, we need to be focused on security. Well, that's part of the answer too. And then you have the folks who are talking about, well, prompt injection and users doing bad stuff. And maybe my credentials get compromised, or it's something at the user layer. And sometimes folks don't incorporate all of those pieces in as well. So I think the biggest mistake I see folks making is that they only look at securing one of those, or maybe 1 or 2 of them, and not all 3. And it really, should be when Peter logs into his computer and he uses MFA on a trusted device, Then Peter, if he's coming from a trusted IP, can come to this specific address where these things are located, right? Then we have to say, okay, Peter's permissions, now that he has proven he has authorization, we have to look at his permissions and see which permissions should actually be the ones interacting with the agent, which ones should be interacting with the application, which one should be interacting with the training data. And suddenly, right, it can feel very overwhelming. And this is where I get excited. But there is quite a bit that needs to be accounted for. I have done a lot of work to simplify this. I got it down to 16 use cases. I will, I can share them with you, either now or later if people are interested. But I have a little picture that I can show if you're interested, kind of for the mapping, if you'd like.
I would be interested in that. The problem I see with what you're saying is that with the data, quite often, like the data team is the data team. They can do the reports and everything, but they don't know and applicate the intimacy of an application's provision level. Okay, so you almost like need to almost like every application, you need to have someone who's very intimate with the data and the security sets of that application. So in essence, you're doing an enterprise SAP rollout or whatever. Okay, and therefore, wait a minute, it's not just the SAP, and then you've got Concur expenses. You need to have someone who knows that data level, this data level, and then it's going into cross-charging departments. So you need to have multiple people with multiple internal, multiple people with multiple levels of information, of knowledge of the granular details. And I suspect this gets a bit of a problem.
You're absolutely right.
Go on.
It can, unless you have the right blueprints and you have somebody friendly on your security team who's able to hand you something that looks like this. Can you see this where it says risk reference architecture?
Are you showing your screen? You're doing that.
Yeah. Can you see it?
Good fancy PowerPoint there. Yep.
So here's exactly what I was just talking about, right? If you start here at the left, right, that's the user layer. Start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? These are the places where I think, a lot of the hype of like, where should we be doing security? And a lot of, I think, application developers and data people are like, the problem is that layer 8, the human. But, to your point, right, this application layer, the model layer, the training data, right, and the concepts that we need different personas between the end user, the deployer, and the provider sitting at the table is exactly why this is so hard. And I think if we have the ability, and what I did was I mapped these OWASP, NIST, EU AI Act, right? These 16 are these 16 use cases, right, for security monitoring across what I call the right target of evaluation. So if we have a harmonious way of talking about risk, and we have a harmonious way of talking about use cases, then we can build those use cases into our monitoring programs and have an easier way of actually doing a good job. And that ends up looking like this, right? All of these green boxes here represent logs that need to be monitored during either runtime, at the agent level, at the app layer, at the training level data layer, and they all need to be going into the SIM. And so I just use Power Platform as an example, right, of where people are usually building and doing a lot of these things. But the cool part is this, from a takeaways perspective, this covers so many use cases of pretty much everybody's apps, everybody's AI agents. They're really not that different at this 10,000 foot level. But if we have all the green boxes and we say, as part of this, AI risk management program, you have to prove that you are doing all of these 16 things and prove that you have a way that we're going to be able to monitor these things, then suddenly those barriers of getting from MVP to the next thing, you have a champion in your security team. So they're going to say, wow, this is amazing. You guys actually did it right. This is incredible that we have a nice blueprint here that we can use for all of our high level designs and don't have to go recreate the wheel every single time we're trying to figure out how we're supposed to do security for these things. Because to your point, the specialists in Concur, the specialists in Microsoft, like they are not going to be security people. And I don't need them to be, but I need to give them the tools and the frameworks to be able to be successful. And that's really what I was trying to do here.
They're also not security people, but they probably just also know the risk of certain data. Can you just go back to that presentation, please, again?
Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, I love it when people are like, show me that again.
Yeah, I'll be reading it, actually, yes.
No, you're good. Let me just grab that for you again here. Let's see, here we go. Let me go back into screen sharing mode for you.
That's
This
a different
one?
slide. No, the one before.
This one.
Not this one. No, you had one. You had a different slide. I think it might. It was a different slide to this you're sharing.
Oh.
Or,
no, I think I only had these two slides. I think I was showing.
okay, show the other one then. The other one.
Yeah, this was the blueprint for if you're actually going to
I see.
try to build an architecture.
Can you go to the previous one, please? Slide 9. You're on slide 10.
This one?
You're on slide 10 at the moment. Go to the previous one.
This one?
I think your screen needs to change. You're probably not going to slide. That's okay. Yeah, this one. Okay, right. I'm just looking at this. Okay. You've got, I'm just looking at this. You've got the AI speak risk and you've got the Gen AI specific risk going in. Why is Gen AI specific risk coming in as an input as biased, harmful, inappropriate content? What is that about?
I think it's more about the difference between generative AI specifically, right? So generative AI hallucinations and inappropriate content are a much bigger problem because of, well, a lot of people just don't do the right sorts of like red teaming and bias testing and those types of things.
Okay.
And it's really meant to focus on when people are building, their own, inputs or putting their own things in. The way that the AI responds to those things from a Gen AI perspective is much, much different, right? If you don't do the things like where you check your models or check your things that they don't, or they don't pass the requirements for hate speech or bias or whatever, then when somebody gives it biased, harmful, or bad content, right, it won't know that it's not supposed to it's not supposed to do things with that data.
Right. Okay.
So
now,
it's, yeah.
Okay. So in the model layer, model theft, obviously that's the IP of the company. How can you prevent that though?
It's not so much about preventing it as it is about de-risking it, right? So this means that things need to go on your risk register, maybe that weren't before, right? It may mean that from a design perspective or a way that the systems know or talk to each other, what we do or design things differently. A lot of times these permission things end up being a problem specifically, but a lot of the model theft basics are, exfiltration happens, in lots of different ways.
Right.
So it's more of just considering exfiltration across a couple of different use cases and not just the training data itself.
Okay, because the other thing as well, like data poisoning, obviously this is sort of like a serious concern, because obviously if you're making business decisions based on AI, based on the data in your database, the moment that gets populated, okay, you're completely screwed. Okay.
100%, exactly, right. And there's definitely a ranking to these, in terms of like left to right, but I haven't done a good job ranking them, and to your point, right, in terms of that heat map. And this is really, I think, where CISOs can use this in a really effective way, right, is make the heat map of the opportunity and likelihood that data poisoning is going to be the thing that gets you. Because I could argue that there are other ones on this list that are probably more likely. I mentioned supply chain as one of the examples and the ones that I was thinking about that make me more worried. But certainly I think from a data poisoning versus data training data leakage perspective, even that those two aren't the same thing. Right. And you can also think about what products or services you may want in addition to help regulate these things. Right? It may not be that you can harden the application or the training data itself. It may be that you need a different tool or something else to help you with your data cataloging or data discovery, right? So it may not necessarily require the application owners to do something different, but it may require the enterprise to step back and say, wow, if we are going to have 20 of these, then and the data that all of these 20 agents are using is the same data, then that data getting poisoned is much more dangerous than if it's just one agent that's using that data, right? So it's really more about trying to make them relational than it is anything else.
And of course, the problem with the data poisoning is that you may not realize it's poisoned until 3 months after the event. Like if something
It's just
crashes,
like a breach. Yep. You won't know
yeah,
until it's too late, unfortunately, in a lot of these cases. Yes.
yes, and of course, you're running your business on that. Yes, so it's the classic trust but verify approach on things.
That is so important in all of these steps, right? That's why I like the idea of this framework, because it makes you not think about these as like specific control points, as like, do you have these, yes or no? But it's more about how are you thinking about these problems in your solution, or have you thought about them in your solution? And if you haven't, right, this is really meant to be more of a checklist to think about all of the different ways and means you may want to design your application. It's almost like, like when you do design constraint thinking and you're like, if I was going to make a dishwasher or a washing machine for somebody in a big city versus somebody who lives out in the middle of nowhere, I would design two totally different washing machines, right?
Yep.
We live in New York City. My washing machine looks nothing like the washing machine I had when I lived in Iowa. Why? Because there was not a space problem in Iowa, right? So, just from a comparison perspective, I think those types of things are important to think about as well.
Well, that's the whole listen to the customer, look at the requirements, and make the recommendations.
Yeah, and I think my job here in creating these blueprints, right, are really to help other people brainstorm and do a better job on their own, right? So if you are a CISO and you can hand this to your client or your internal clients, right, and say, look, this is what I expect, then this becomes a 16-step checklist to getting the security team to say yes to your AI agent. And now it isn't about flying under the radar anymore. These are ways to give you confidence that we are doing security so that you can, do the next thing.
Okay.
Instead of it getting stuck.
Okay, so you've got this fantastic, all singing, all dancing AI solution. The people who need to sign off on this thing has got to be, obviously the business, because they're probably paying for it, CTO, Chief Risk Officer, Chief Security Officer, compliance officer, depending on the regulation. Have I missed anyone else out here?
No, I've seen it be that, it's a chief risk person, it's a CIO, it's a CISO. Sometimes, even the CEOs get involved if they, really are banking on these initiatives. But Peter, I think the other big realization I've had in talking to clients is there's such a big difference in clients who are building and developing their own software solutions as clients versus those who are not. And it's almost like those who are naturally closer to a lot of these either engineering or software development or infrastructure related types of things, they're having a little bit of an easier time with some of this. And I think those who are further away. So
are you classing like are you sort of saying people in Silicon Valley can do it easier than people on the East Coast?
Not even in Silicon Valley, right? I'm thinking, right, those who have access are going to have an easier time learning than those who don't have access, right? So it's an unfortunate reality of kind of what we had talked about before we started recording, right? Which is the idea that if you don't have those things, you're never going to get an opportunity to get started. But if you have those things and they're in your backyard, or you're one of the people who is a maverick or is ready to be excited about those things, and you already work in a software development company, or you already work at a consulting firm, or you already work at somewhere where they're doing a lot of technology stuff, it's almost like we all have a leg up in some of these conversations of getting to yes, rather than starting at a different place where everyone's expertise is not in IT operations or security or anything like that at all. So those frontier firms are really going to get the benefit of this, I think. And Microsoft came out with this frontier firm word as part of their
I've not heard of that buzzword. I'm not,
oh, really?
That sounds
oh,
like,
man.
No, I'm not into the corporate jargon mindset on that. Maybe that's the culture of that CISO dragon, rather than a 10,000 consulting firm.
No, this is Microsoft is calling basically in the same way that we had cloud native, right? We now have a new definition of frontier, right? Frontier means you have adopted AI first. You are doing the right security things up front. You are designing your entire company around these types of foundations, as opposed to those who are thinking about this as an add-on or a nice to have or a wrapper around their existing thing, right? That to me is that lift and shift. Why did folks fail when they moved to the cloud? Well, they just took the same things they were doing and they put them in the cloud, and they didn't re-architect them, they didn't redesign them or anything like that. So frontier firms are meant to be that next phase of organizations that are AI first and driven largely by AI.
All right, so let me add a little bit of depth to what you're saying here. You talk about frontier for like 25 years ago. I was working for a firm. We deployed Blackberries, okay, because it meant that people could actually manage emails. Because it meant that people could actually manage their emails and send email. What happened? People just sent more emails around. Okay, so it didn't actually solve the problem. Same as with this whole Zoom economy, and Teams. We can now have more meetings, whatever. Okay, meetings are more convenient. What does that just mean? It just means we have more meetings. It doesn't really solve the core problem here. So technology does by this. I've totally seen this as well, where we're a cloud-ready organization, and what they've done is they've just migrated all of their on-prem applications into VMs into the cloud, which is not really what it would sounds fantastic in the board meeting. But it doesn't really work.
No. Where's your containers?
Okay, when you look into the details. So the idea, we're doing AI, but it needs to make that difference. And that, I think, where there's a little bit of when you move beyond the corporate jargon speak. Okay, AI, was it you used it? Was it frontier first? Is that what you used? Was that the word you used?
So they call them frontier firms, right? So it's basically like you have every employee has an AI assistant, and then agents are digital colleagues, and then humans set directions and the agents run the business, right? This is their vision of what a frontier firm journey ends up looking like. But it's any next generation company that uses AI agents to scale and work smarter, and do this agent hybrid team concept.
Right. Okay. I'm sure smiling a little here, because every time.
No, it's all marketing right now, right? But I want people to know that there are these new definitions coming out, and it's just as important to know what they mean if you decide you don't want to be one, as otherwise.
So the reason why I'm smiling, you're a little bit similar to Asia Major. So the business strategist Peter Drucker. Okay. So Peter Drucker was the whole book about downsizing, right sizing. That were basically you could knock out middle management and flatten your organization, which will basically make your organization more effective, communication free, and of course save money. Okay. And I remember someone that was working for, I think it was GE, and they deployed this. And then after about 9 months, they realized that the company couldn't function because nobody could make decisions on the whole thing.
That's right.
So they then had to rehire a lot of these people. And I'm hearing this a little bit where people are now, they've been laid off because of AI. The company can't function, and they've had to rehire these people back. Okay. So it is that marketing sort of so quite often you get a phrase, you get a big, and people say, this is what we're doing. We're going to implement this. And then you realize, well, actually things are not quite as good as they actually were. It looked good, but it didn't. It didn't really work. It wasn't really a true effective way of doing this. Like the whole cloud ready, there's not much point in moving stuff into the cloud if it's all on-prem architecture. And it's normally
agree.
That digital transformation bit by bit by doing it. And then maybe after 3 years, this is how it works. Okay.
We all said we needed VPNs forever. And now, thank God, most of us are like, we don't actually need VPNs anymore. We need a better way to get into, get it to our systems. You see things now like Microsoft, they've done a lot with the Entra Suite now around some of those things. But yeah, I think your point is well taken for sure.
Well, so that's kind of where, and also when I hear a tech firm and they're using a tech phrase, there's a little bit of a sort of vested interest on that, rather than say let's do like that. We're cloud ready. We're cloud first. I've heard that many times. It's like old.
Yeah, this is a new version of that. Yeah, you've nailed it, right? This is a new version of that. And, as long as we all can equate that, a duck that quacks is still a duck, I think that's the most important part. I think the other interesting thing about what Microsoft's AI frontier firm concept is that they really are trying to look at it in a little bit more of a holistic way than I think some of the other firms are when it comes to things, especially like cybersecurity and having a lot more of those tools built into the productivity suite than necessarily requiring 6 or 10 or 8, other cybersecurity tools.
Okay.
So.
And the other thing, what Microsoft doing, obviously there's a land grab going on here, because once an organization goes into, say, the Microsoft world, or the Google world, or ChatGPT, it's difficult to shift out of that. Okay, so therefore, if you can come up with, so we say, shiny objects which people love to gravitate towards, okay, then you're in for a win. On that.
Yeah, okay, I think that's that MIT study, right? That says AI actually isn't that great, and hasn't really gotten as much value as people think. It's like, well, and for all use cases, maybe, but like we do know for sure that these 6 use cases are way better with AI than they were before. So, I think we're still looking to see where this key, it looks like it opens all these doors. I'm going to try to open all these doors. And instead of it being, the skeleton key that everybody thinks it is, it really is just only good at opening certain kinds of doors with certain kinds of locks still. And I think that's the reality of where we're at. But I was reading this really cool article that was talking about, we're going to move from large language models to world models. And world models will end up being actually replacing most of the LLM stuff here shortly. So who knows, this frontier firm thing may not last as long as we think. It may be on to the next new innovation in 6 or 8 months.
Well, you also mentioned something about that key can open many doors. It's like a Swiss Army knife. It has many blades, but none of them are particularly good.
I actually have a great example for this. So in nature, there's 2 kinds of animals, right, Peter? The ones that when they're born, they can run, right? Like a horse or something like that. And then there are animals that when they're born, they're like pink, shriveled up, useless things that don't do anything and can't survive on their own for long periods of time and need amazing amounts of nourishment and care and skill creation in order for them to be able to do anything. And AI has manifested itself just like that. If you expect that when the AI gets there that it can run, don't expect that horse to ever become Mr. Ed, because horses can't talk. They don't have that skill. They were not born with those skills. You cannot know how to do that. But if that pink shriveled thing is, something that is incubated and, fed and loved and cared for 18 years, then you never know what a human may be able to do, right? You may never know, what that human is capable of, right? Because you said you wanted a horse that could talk, not a person that could have an eloquent conversation with you, right? And I wish that everyone, when they said, hey, I'm going to start my AI zoo, that they paused for 2 seconds and said, what kind of animals do I want in my zoo? And do I actually have all the things I need in my zoo to make those animals happy? Because if I pick one horse and I pick one shriveled pink thing, everything about keeping them happy and healthy is completely different. And if we don't step back and say, what are the animals we want in our zoo, and what does the zoo enclosure look like? We're going to put the crocodiles in an enclosure that's meant for polar bears and wonder why the crocodiles all died.
Yeah, no.
It seems insane, right? Taking it out of context, right? But that's exactly what's happening in AI right now. And we are all the AI zookeepers of the future. And it's going to be my job to make sure the animals don't die. And my job to make sure their enclosures are the right enclosures for them, not anyone else's. It's not the animal's responsibility. I would never ask the animal to do that for themselves. We can't ask AI to do that for itself either. That's still going to be a human responsibility.
That is true. On that note, I do like that analogy of the zoo, actually. Okay, Mona, we're up on the hour. It's almost 1 o'clock.
Thanks so much for the time.
Good chatting to you. All right, well, enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you so much. Yeah, take care.